Welcome back to the Political Pulse, your trusted source for navigating the whirlwind of U.S. politics with a dash of humor and a sprinkle of sanity. I'm Andrew Carter.
And I'm Rachel Bennett. Each week, we sift through the chaos to bring you the stories that matter and the ones that make you wonder if we're all living in a political sitcom. All right, so this week in U.S. politics, March 10th through the 15th.
2025.
Yeah, 2025. Really wow. Threw us for a loop. It's been a bit of a whirlwind, right? I mean, just looking at all these reports and analyses and trying
It's been a busy one.
It has been.
Definitely not your average week in Washington.
No, not at all. So we're going to focus on these three major areas that seem to be kind of all tangled up together. First, that ever-present drama of government funding, will they, won't they, and then what President Trump's been up to, saying, doing, and then the ongoing debates and kind of maybe struggles within the Democratic Party. So think of this as your express lane to understanding what happened without having to wade through all the noise.
I think what's so interesting about all of this is how you have these events that seem kind of separate on the surface, right? You have the budget fight, the president's out there making statements, the opposition's trying to figure out what to do. But actually, when you look closer, they're all connected to these deeper currents that are really shaping, the whole political landscape.
Yeah. Okay, let's dive right in. Let's start with, I guess, the old familiar tune, the budget showdown. It feels like we're always on the verge of a government shutdown. So walk us through what happened this time with this latest deadline.
Yeah, it was... as always, it was really a close call. So the House, they got a 6-month temporary funding bill passed. That was on March 11th.
Yeah.
The vote, it was pretty tight, 217 to 213, Then the Senate, they followed suit on March 14th, and then, boom, President Trump signed it into law the next day, March 15th.
Yeah.
So crisis averted for now, but not without some bumps along the way.
Yeah, and I think it really exposes something kind of fundamental about how our system is or isn't working, right? This constant brinkmanship, it just shows how divided things are and how much power even a relatively small group has when they threaten to shut the whole thing down.
Exactly.
And speaking of those bumps, one of the biggest was within the Democratic Party itself, right? There were reports that 10 Democratic senators actually voted in favor of this bill,
Right.
Which, that seems like a pretty significant crack in, party unity.
Yeah, absolutely. And, that vote really sort of brought to light this ongoing debate within the Democratic Party.
Mm-hmm.
On the one hand, you had the argument that even supporting a temporary measure like this, just to keep the lights on, it ends up helping President Trump. It advances his agenda, even if indirectly, and it doesn't provide a strong enough check on his power.
So what was the other side of that? What were those 10 senators thinking? What was their reasoning for breaking ranks like that?
Well, I think for them, the focus was probably on, their responsibility to keep the government running. A shutdown, it has real consequences.
Right.
For everyday people, government workers, the economy. So from their perspective, avoiding that disruption was probably the top priority, even if it meant, maybe looking bad in the short term or maybe giving the president a small win.
Yeah.
It's like this age-old question in politics. When do you compromise? When do you stand your ground?
Yeah.
It's tough.
It is a tough one. Well, moving from navigating one potential crisis to, I don't know, maybe creating another.
Right.
President Trump's speech at the Department of Justice headquarters, that's not exactly your usual setting for whatever that was.
Yeah, what was really interesting there was how different it was from what you'd normally expect, right? It was supposed to be, I guess, a policy speech, but it quickly turned into this kind of like event session for President Trump, where he just aired all his grievances about all the legal cases he's facing.
Yeah.
It's like he used the DOJ, the Department of Justice, as his own personal stage to, attack the legal system and try to put pressure on these cases, which is, pretty unprecedented.
Yeah, look, politicians, they complain in public. That's nothing new. But to do it at DOJ headquarters, that's a statement. What were some of the things he actually said? What were his specific complaints?
He didn't hold back, that's for sure. He went after the judiciary as a whole, calling them, unfair. He even went so far as to call President Biden's family a crime family. Pretty huge accusation to throw out there. And then he specifically praised Judge Aileen Cannon for dismissing one of his cases.
Yeah.
Which, when you think about it, it's like he's trying to undermine the whole idea of an independent judiciary.
And then there was that comment about making it illegal to criticize judges, which, that really stood out to me.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, that was something else. He basically said that, we need to protect judges from public criticism so they can stay impartial. But of course, that raises all sorts of First Amendment issues, freedom of speech. I mean, can you imagine a law like that actually passing? It would be challenged in court immediately. It's
Yeah.
almost like he's deliberately saying things that are, legally questionable.
It feels very, very intentional, doesn't it? It's like he's challenging the system itself. But then it's like he switched gears completely and he started bragging about what he sees as his accomplishments.
Yeah, totally. After all that complaining and attacking, he suddenly pivoted to like campaign mode, talking about, how great things were when he was in office. He mentioned, lower illegal border crossings, the fight against fentanyl, all that stuff. There's like two speeches in one, part grievance, part campaign rally. And I think if you zoom out and look at the bigger picture, it's part of this strategy he's been using, right? He connects directly with his base, fires them up, while also attacking anyone he sees as an enemy.
Okay, let's shift gears again. Let's talk about the Democrats and this kind of discord, this internal conflict. So it seems like that funding bill vote, it wasn't just a one-time disagreement. It kind of exposed these deeper strategic tensions within the party, right?
Yeah, exactly. It brought to the surface this fundamental divide, this question of tactics. I mean, should the Democrats fight every battle with everything they've got? Or should they be more strategic, more selective about where they choose to engage? And I think this reflects a bigger debate that's happening on the left, not just within the Democratic Party, but more broadly about how to deal with, this populist right-wing movement that we're seeing. Do you fight fire with fire, or do you try to find a different way?
Yeah, and we saw this play out very publicly, right? I mean, Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, she directly criticized Senator Schumer, the majority leader, even suggested that he should face a primary challenge. I mean, that's pretty serious.
It is, and I think it shows how strong this grassroots movement is, this feeling that the party needs to be more aggressive, more confrontational. They want to see their leaders taking a hard line against Trump and his policies, no compromises.
And then you have people like James Carville, right, who are saying, well, maybe the best strategy is to just let the Republicans mess up, let them fail on their own, and then the public will turn against them. Which is, I mean, that's a completely different approach. It's much more about patience, about playing the long game.
Right, exactly. They're thinking more about the big picture, about winning elections down the road. They think that picking too many fights or being too confrontational, it could backfire, actually hurt the Democrats in the long run. It's all about, choosing your battles carefully, trying to capture the mood of the country and using that to your advantage.
I mean, isn't there a risk, though, that this kind of wait-and-see approach could be seen as, I don't know, inaction? I mean, could it alienate their base?
Yeah, that's a great point. And it's a real dilemma for the Democrats, right? I mean, how do you satisfy this desire for, immediate action, for fighting back hard, while also trying to be strategic, trying to win in the long term? It's a tough balance.
Yeah, and what happens if they don't find that balance? What are the risks of this division continuing?
Well, I think the biggest danger is that the party just, falls apart. If these different factions can't come together, can't agree on a shared strategy, it's going to lead to more infighting, more division. They won't be able to present a united front against the Republicans, and that could really hurt them in future elections. It could also demoralize their voters. People get tired of constant conflict, especially if it doesn't seem to be going anywhere.
So it really is this high-stakes balancing act for them.
Yeah.
Okay. Another thing that happened this week, something that I found pretty disturbing, was the Trump administration's actions regarding student protests, particularly at Columbia University. This seems like a pretty significant escalation in how they're dealing with dissent, don't you think?
Yeah, it's definitely concerning. What's particularly striking is that they're directly interfering in the affairs of a private university. I mean, according to reports, they're demanding more control over academic departments, threatening to cut off federal funding if the university doesn't crack down on student activism. It's like they're trying to silence any voices that disagree with them, even on college campuses. I mean, it really makes you worry about the future of free speech in this country.
And then you have the case of Mahmoud Khalil, a graduate student at Columbia who was detained by DHS agents and is now facing deportation under the McCarran-Walter Act.
Oh, right.
That's a pretty extreme example.
It is. And for those who might not know, the McCarran-Walter Act, it's this old law from the Cold War era, and it basically allows the government to deny entry or deport people based on their political beliefs or activities. I mean, using that against a student who's involved in campus protests, it's chilling. It sends this message that if you speak out, if you express the wrong opinions, you could be punished, you could even be kicked out of the country. And it really shows how far the administration is willing to go to silence dissent.
And it seems like Columbia's response is only making things worse. I mean, they've taken disciplinary action against students involved in past protests, and now the students are suing the university.
Yeah, it's a really messy situation. I mean, Columbia's caught in the middle, right? They're getting pressure from the federal government on one side, and then they have their own students who are understandably upset on the other side. And these disciplinary actions, the lawsuit, it all just highlights how tense things are, how worried people are about their rights being violated. I mean, the students are saying they're afraid that if their records are shared with the government, they could face retaliation. It's a climate of fear, basically.
It really raises some fundamental questions, right? I mean, where do we draw the line between free speech and, what's considered acceptable behavior? How much autonomy should universities have? To what extent can the government interfere in these spaces?
Absolutely. And, if you connect this back to what the president said about potentially limiting criticism of judges, it's like there's this pattern emerging, right? It's like he's trying to control the narrative to silence anyone who disagrees with him, whether they're in the legal system, the media, or even on college campuses.
So looking back at this week, which has been, I think it's safe to say, pretty eventful, what are the main takeaways for you? What are the big themes that stand out?
I think there are a few key things. First, it's clear that governing in this current political climate is incredibly difficult. I mean, the budget standoff, the divisions within both parties, it just shows how polarized things are, how hard it is to find common ground. Second, I think we're seeing a very consistent approach from the Trump administration when it comes to dissent. They're not afraid to be confrontational, to use their power to silence their opponents. Whether it's attacking the judiciary, trying to control what happens on college campuses, or even, suggesting that criticizing judges should be illegal, it all points to this desire to control the narrative, to shut down any opposition.
So hopefully this deep dive has given you a better understanding of these really complex political events without getting too bogged down in the details.
I hope so. I think by looking at these different events, the budget, the president's speech, the dynamics within the Democratic Party, the crackdown on campus protests, we get a much clearer picture of what's going on in U.S. politics right now. It's not just about individual events. It's about these larger forces, these underlying tensions that are shaping the political landscape.
So here's something to think about as we wrap up. What are the long-term implications of all this? I mean, what does it mean for our institutions, for our political parties, for the future of free speech in this country? We've seen some pretty worrying developments this week, and it's worth considering how these dynamics might continue to play out in the weeks and months to come.
Yeah, I think that's a really crucial question, and one that we all need to be thinking about.
Absolutely.
It's going to be fascinating to see how things unfold.
All right, that's a wrap on this week's Political Pulse. Remember, we're bringing you 2 podcasts a week, this weekly recap plus a deep dive where we break down one major story with all the nuance and snark it deserves.
And when breaking news hits, we'll be dropping emergency episodes to keep you updated, because the news cycle never sleeps, and neither do we. Don't forget to subscribe and catch us next time for another round of political chaos.
Until then, stay informed and stay sane.
See you next time.
Bye, everyone.